All right, so it's a couple minutes past. Why don't we get started? So I wanted to first thank you everyone for joining me, and hope we'll have a good study session and some good discussion today. So I prepared something on one topic, but I wanted to, before we begin, Jewish medical ethics is a very big topic with lots of different things to talk about. So I wanted to take a minute to just go around and each person say, share, like, give me one or two topics they might like to talk about. Something of particular concern that you'd be interested in learning more about. And I prepared something on vaccines, in particular the COVID vaccine for today, but we can definitely, I'm definitely taking input for future sessions. So I'm going to call on you in the order that I see you on the screen, which may not be the order other people see you. So please feel free, when I call on you, could you just please unmute, and then we'll love to hear about people's interest. So first, Howard and Pam. Howard.
You know, Rabbi, at this point, I haven't given any thought to a focus. So
Okay.
Maybe as we move along, it will crystallize with me.
Okay. All right. So yeah. Well, I'll ask you at the end if anyone has other ideas they'd like to do. Okay, Ellen, you're muted.
Hi. We haven't really thought about it, but anything having to do with medical ethics, or we'll think about it, and at the
Sure.
end, maybe we'll come up with other things.
Okay. The Stearns.
Yeah, we the same thing. We haven't thought about it that much. So
okay, I'm sensing a trend here. I think what I'll do is make sure that we have a couple minutes at the end. Maybe once we begin talking about this topic, it will spark ideas, and I will give a few minutes at the end to get some feedback as to what's next. That's a good idea. Okay, so so I prepared some material on sort of Jewish ideas about healthcare and preserving life in general, and then some particular information on vaccines and Jewish history, which I thought was fascinating. I had never learned some of this stuff before. But before I get started, I just want to get a sense from people, what are some issues that you've heard raised about vaccines, sort of ethical issues, moral issues, maybe religious issues, things that either objections or concerns that people have, or compelling reasons to get vaccinated. And actually, instead of having a sort of free for all, you can either raise your hand, or if you'd like to just type into the chat ideas that you've heard about vaccines and concerns surrounding them, pro or con. I want to see if I can fit some of these into the categories I prepared.
what is the issue?
Not understood, to be honest with you, that people claim they have religious reasons why they can't get vaccines, and I don't understand that. I mean, they get other vaccines. I don't understand what the religious piece is on this that other people say.
Great.
I don't hear it from Jewish, well, maybe from the
Right.
Orthodox community, so.
Not so much.
Yeah,
Yeah, Victor and Ellen.
I quite frankly get annoyed at people that don't want to be vaccinated.
Mhm.
You know, particularly when they have children.
Mhm,
In New York State, children could not go to school
mhm.
without getting vaccinated.
Right.
And I know I have my sister-in-law's children refuse to get vaccinated. And it makes me very upset,
Mhm.
because we've gotten vaccinated so many times for when I went to school, for polio vaccine. Oh my God, kids lined up out the door to get the polio vaccine, the flu vaccine. When we were younger, we figured out we don't need the flu vaccine. And that year we got the flu. And I cannot tell you how sick we were.
Yeah.
It was
So-
awful.
Right. Go ahead.
I understand that there's no religion that restricts vaccines or anything like that. I mean, there were no such things thousands of years ago when religion,
Or
you know,
just,
first began to be followed.
Right.
And
There is a question in some religions about whether you leave healing to God. Or whether medical intervention in general is okay. I mean, the big example is Christian Science, right?
Yeah,
Where-
Christian
but,
Science.
but and to some extent, things like Jehovah's Witnesses, where they don't do blood donations, or they don't
But
accept blood
several
donations.
courts have ruled against them and have allowed blood transfusions or blood treatment to those Christian Science people. They've been
Right.
overruled.
Yeah, so I don't want to get too deeply into that. So what I'm hearing so far is there's confusion about, there's issues about people would like to know about vaccine refusal and where, if any, religious objections might possibly come from in particular. Anything else that people are wondering about? Heavy. You're muted.
Some groups feel that it might cause birth issues or infertility issues, which in some circles, of course, is a very important thing.
Okay, so one piece is just sort of factual questions about risk.
yeah,
Justified or not justified, obviously, because there's lots of misinformation circulating. Yeah, anyone else?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, Wilma.
This is Wilma. Yeah, like I have some, well, I've been vaccinated and boosted, and I'm going to continue to get boosted. I do all the vaccines that I can get. But I have some friends who have been vaccinated, won't get the booster, and their argument isn't completely nutty. They say, in their opinion, this isn't really a vaccine. You can't compare it to the polio vaccine. You can't compare it to the MMR vaccine. You can't compare it to the chickenpox vaccine.
Because
That it's more of a therapeutic than a vaccine. And until they, and you know, that's their argument. And
but why? Because it's not 100%.
it's not just not 100%. I mean, if you have to do it every 5 months, and now you might need a fourth one. And even the head of Pfizer and Moderna is saying, you know, their shots don't work against Omicron. So, not me, because I'm getting all the vaccines I can get, but a lot of people are saying, you know, it just doesn't work the way it was originally told, we were originally told it was going to work. And truthfully, I have a hard time arguing with them on some of
Okay.
these issues.
All right, so I actually, as a former biology major who still reads some of the biomedical stuff, I have some things to say about that, but we'll leave that towards the end, I think. I guess one thing that, I guess I'll just say one thing about that, and then I want to move on from this particular issue, which is that when you have a new disease, you know, scientific, you know, knowledge is evolving, and most vaccines need a series of several shots. You know, for most vaccines we get them as kids. You know, so I remember quite reasonably recently my kids getting, you know, 3, 4, 5 of particular vaccines, because that's what you need to get an enduring immune response, and those are for things that aren't, you know, developing and mutating in sort of a pandemic fashion. So at any rate, but we can talk more about the biology of it later on. But so I guess there is a question, though, a broader question about sort of scientific certainty and, you know, how certain risk is and how certain therapeutic treatment is, and, you know, when something is sort of a judgment call versus required. So that's an interesting question in Jewish law. Anything else? Then we'll move on to the stuff I prepared. Anyone? Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. I was trying to get I have a piece of software that theoretically would let me like be in a little window in the corner and then have the screen share take up most of the screen. I could not get that working in time, but I'm gonna try that for next time so we can actually sort of see each other a little better. But in the meantime, let me do my screen share. Where is my, and actually I'm gonna share the screen. I'm also gonna paste a link into the chat. I made a text study that on the website Safaria. And hang on, I should not be pasting the password to my Zoom here, just a moment. But if anyone is, so let's see, where is that browser window? Here we go. Share link, copy. So if you are on a computer and can, have a window open with a text sheet and also keep the Zoom open. Why is this not copying here? There we go. So I'm pasting this into the chat. That is fascinating. Here we go. It's interesting. I'm copying from my browser and I paste and nothing happens, but I just say, here we go. Okay, so I'm also going to open this up as a screen share so people can just see the material I put together. Okay.
Are we supposed to click on the thing that you just put in the chat?
If you like, or I'm also going to be screen sharing it, so it's up to you. If you would like to look at it, so you can sort of scroll around on your own and not be limited to what I'm showing on the screen, then you could do that.
I'm happy with a screen. I'm happy with a screen share.
Okay, so let me do that. Here we go. Screen share. I actually have the correct window open.
I know.
Just one more second. Here we go.
Yeah,
Share.
sorry.
Here we go. Okay. All right. So this is a okay. Here's a text sheet I put together on first just sort of general issues of medical ethics and the importance of preserving life and health in Jewish tradition. And many of these will be sort of familiar texts to some of us, but I want to go through them because sort of later sources rely on them. And please feel free. I can't see everyone in the group easily when I'm sharing this. My screen isn't big enough. But if you have a question or a comment, please do feel free to just jump in, unmute yourself and jump in. I'm happy to take questions. So the first sort of foundational texts that are used in later Jewish law to talk about the importance of taking care of one's own health and preserving one's own life and taking actions towards safety. There are a couple of verses in Deuteronomy. One of them is Rak hishamer lecha ushmor nafshecha me'od. But take care of yourself, guard yourself, and guard your soul, which can also be a word for self. So either guard yourself, your being, me'od, a lot, scrupulously. And then again, a few verses later, v'nishmartem, and so v'nishmartem me'od l'nafshotechem. That's in the plural, but it's the same thing. You all guard yourselves carefully. So that text about taking care of yourself and of your nefesh, of your nafshecha, in rabbinic sort of logic, later Jewish law says, why does it say guard yourself and also guard your soul? And there's a sort of notion in Jewish law that if the Torah repeats something, it must be there to teach two different things. And so one of them is the context where this is happening in Deuteronomy about keeping God's commandments so that you're going to prosper when you enter the land. But then the rabbis say, well, there's this repetition here, here and then also here. There's these two texts, and at least one of these repetitions comes to teach you it's not just about following God's commandments, it's also about caution. It's about making sure to be appropriately cautious and avoiding danger to life. The other piece, which is a foundational text that many of you may have heard, is this is in the book of Leviticus. This is in the reading for is that right? I believe it's in the reading for Yom Kippur, actually, for Yom Kippur afternoon. It says, "V'nishmartem et chukotai," I should keep my laws, bet mishpatai, and my rules. Asher yaseh otam hadam, that a person shall do them, b'chai b'hem, and live by means of them, and live through them, ani Adonai. And the rabbi's comment on that b'chai b'hem is, you should live by them and not die by them. And this is one of the places where in Jewish law, we get this notion of pikuach nefesh, of saving life, overrides just about every commandment there is. So if it break Shabbat or save a life, you save the life. Eat non-kosher food in order to save a life, eat the non-kosher food. Just about every commandment. There's some very small exceptions, mostly having to do with murdering someone or worship this idol or I'll kill you, or there are a couple of others, but those or commit sexual immorality with this other person or I'll kill you. Those are kind of the big three. And other than that, just about every piece of Jewish law, when there's a conflict between that and saving lives, the saving lives wins. And this is the core text for that. The laws are there, b'chai b'hem, so you should live through them. There is this is famous among other places from Schindler's List. This is the Mishnah from Sanhedrin. And the standard text of the Mishnah is a little bit different from this. This is the version that's found in manuscripts in earlier editions. So this is, believe it or not, the context here is Sanhedrin is giving the rules of capital punishment and of witnesses in capital cases because there was the death penalty, and basically saying to the witnesses, be very careful about what you testify because a life is at stake here. And they say, Adam, Nivra Adam Yechidi, the first human being, Adam, was created unique, alone, as an individual. Lamedcha, to teach you, Shekol hame'abed nefesh echad, anyone who destroys one soul, one life, ma'aleh elav hakatuv ki'ilu ibed olam maleh, that the Torah treats it as if he destroyed an entire world. And that is the famous line from, and the next piece is the famous line from Schindler's List. And I believe in the movie, this is the line they inscribe, I think, the ring that they give to Schindler at the end of the film. Anyone who saves one life, sustains one life, Mikayem nefesh echad, ma'aleh elav hakatuv ki'ilu kiyem olam maleh, and someone who saves one life is credited as if they sustained or saved an entire world. And the logic there is somewhat compelling, that if there was one human being in at the beginning of everything, killing Adam that's also all of Adam's descendants, and that's all humanity. And so any individual potentially has a world within them. And so if they're killed, we're losing not only them but the entire breadth of humanity that could have come from them. And saving a person is is similarly weighty. Just a piece about the one soul. The sort of printed versions of the Mishnah here say nefesh echad b'Yisrael, one Jewish soul, one soul of the Jewish people, and that's I've actually seen that in sort of in some anti-Semitic propaganda. See, the Jews only care about themselves. They don't care about non-Jews and non-Jews' lives. And first of all, if you look at the logic here, that Adam was not a Jew, right? This is the first human being, the common ancestor of all of humanity. So logically, that doesn't make sense. That would be restricted only to Jews. And then it turns out, if you go back to manuscripts and before the printed editions of the Mishnah and the Talmud, that the earlier manuscripts actually did not have that word. So the earlier manuscripts are more universal. And I'm not sure, I've not done the research as to the history of the printed version of the Mishnah and Talmud we have, but so the text that they came from was more universal, and that's also the one that was in Schindler's List. I remember some anti-Semitic stuff going around when Schindler's List came out about this verse. Oh, you're misquoting it. That's not what it says. Well, there's good reason to believe that it says the more universal version. At any rate, I've been talking kind of nonstop. Does anyone have any comments or questions before I move on?
I was just going to say that in terms of, saving one soul and save the world, going back to the vaccines, by being vaccinated, you're saving so many people. Not only your own, but everybody with whom you come in contact.
Right. And we're about to get to that, this notion of protecting other people and not just yourself. And that's good. That's great. That's a great analogy. That in this verse, it's about descendants, and here in the context of infectious disease, it's about people who are alive right now. But yeah, it's a great parallel. So then I want to just go over some of the basic texts about protecting other people. So very famously, also this is in the alternative Torah reading for Yom Kippur afternoon. That I think that's the one we actually read from, from Leviticus 19. We read Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa ani Adonai. Do not stand idly by the blood of your fellow, of your neighbor. I am Adonai. And what that there are a couple different linguistic takes as to what it means to stand on or stand by the blood of your neighbor. But Rashi, the French Torah commentator, 11th, 12th century, I think I've got his dates right. I'm terrible with dates. Says, interprets this as not standing by when someone is coming to harm, when you could step in and save them. And in particular, he says, by seeing them, witnessing that person's death, and you're able to rescue them. For example, if someone's drowning in a river, or if a wild beast or a robber is attacking them, that you need to step in and save them. This then winds up being a whole discussion in Jewish law about how much risk are you required to take to save another person. Are you required to step in when it's likely you're going to be killed too? Well, if you don't know how to swim, so this becomes a larger discussion in Jewish law about acceptable risk. But certainly in Jewish law, if the risk to you is minimal and you can intervene and save a life, absolutely, you're not only is it just a nice thing to do, but you're required to do it. And then there's this text from Deuteronomy becomes sort of the wellspring from which a whole precautionary principle in Jewish law comes of things you do in order to prevent others from coming to harm, even if it costs you something. So this is famous, what seems to be a pretty trivial verse. When you build a new house, you should make a parapet, like a fence around your roof. So we're talking about flat roofs here, and so people go up on the roof, and you need to make a fence around it so that someone doesn't fall. But below tasim damim bebetecha, you will not bring blood guilt on your house. Ki pol hanofel mimenu, if anyone falls from it. And you might say, well, it's my house. The only person who's going to be going up there is me or my family. Shouldn't I be able to take the risk? And here, as in a lot of cases, the answer is no. That there's sort of reasonable precautions that you're required to take to protect other people, and even just to protect yourself. And this verse then gets sort of expanded out in later Jewish law to apply not just to roofs and fences, but sort of a more general principle of it's like putting a fence around your swimming pool, or not leaving manhole covers open, or having a lightning rod. So Maimonides, was writing in 11th, 12th century in Spain and then in Egypt, says there's no difference between a roof or anything else that's dangerous and likely to cause death to a person who might stumble. If, for instance, someone has a well or a pit in their courtyard, they have to build an enclosing ring 10 handbreadths high or put a cover over it so a person should not fall into it and die. Any obstruction that's a danger to life must be removed as a matter of positive duty and extremely necessary caution. I might just reading a newspaper story today about the Bronx fire, this terrible fire that happened, and one of the things that contributed to was a door that was supposed to automatically close and didn't. And just something as simple as a closing mechanism on a door would certainly fall into this category. And then he continues, the sages have prohibited many things because they're dangerous to life. If anyone disregards them and says, what claim have others on me if I risk my own life, or I don't mind this, he should be lashed for disobedience. So this is in the in the medieval period where Jewish communities were, at least in theory, self-governing, and the sort of penalty for breaking rabbinic law is lashes. They didn't have jail then. But the point being, I think, is that this isn't just a nice thing to do. For Maimonides, he's saying, and this phrase in particular, what do other people care if I risk my own life? Echoes pretty strongly with rhetoric in the country right now. And I think Maimonides would even say that's true even if it is only your own life. If you have an open, cistern in your house, I think he'd probably even say you're required to cover that, and not just even if you're the only person who ever goes in there. I think he seems to be saying that, the rabbis have legislated this even for yourself, let alone for other people. So later on, in the Shulchan Aruch, which is medieval, sort of late medieval code of Jewish law, there is a Sephardi piece of it that kind of mirrors what Maimonides said, and then Ramah, who's the Ashkenazi commentator who took the Shulchan Aruch from Rabbi Yosef Karo, and Rabbi Moses Isserles sort of wrote a commentary on it, adding on sort of Ashkenazi, practice onto it. So he's called the Ramah, which is actually a Hebrew acronym for Rabbi Moses Isserles. The A is an Aleph, and he says he sort of echoes but he agrees with what the Shulchan Aruch is saying about just covering cisterns and things, and then says, similarly, you should be careful with all things that cause danger, because danger is stricter than transgressions, and one should be more careful with an uncertain danger than with an uncertain, this should be prohibition. So they also prohibited one to go into a dangerous place, such as under a leaning wall or alone at night. They also prohibited you to drink water from rivers at night, or to put one's mouth on a stream of water and drink, because these matters have a concern of danger. And here we're getting into sort of medieval superstition, medicine. It's the widespread custom not to drink water during the equinox. And the early ones, I think the early legal authorities wrote this, and it's not to be changed. And then he says, they also wrote to flee from the city when a plague is in the city, and we should leave at the beginning of the plague and not at the end. All of these things are because of danger, and the person who guards his soul will distance himself from them. And it's prohibited to rely on a miracle in all of these matters. So this reminds me of some things I've heard from some, granted pretty fringe Christian evangelical leaders who are saying, well, if I'm meant to get this, I'm meant to get this, and God will protect me. And the Jewish take on avoiding danger is precisely the opposite. That yes, maybe there will be a miracle, maybe God will protect people, but you don't rely on that. You don't sort of force God's hand. God gives us science and tools and intellect and all of the means within our power to protect ourselves. And we should be doing that, and not just saying, well, I'm not going to do anything and just rely on God to do everything. It reminds me, actually, I was just talking with the B'nai Mitzvah students last night about the this week's Torah portion, where the Israelites are at the edge of the Red Sea. Pharaoh's army is bearing down, and Moses says, "Don't worry, God is going to save us." And God says to Moses, "Why are you calling out to me? Tell the people to go ahead." And I really read that as God saying, I'm going to help you, but you have to take the first step. You have to help yourself. It feels almost like a rebuke of Moses that the people are no longer slaves, and they need to take a step of positive self-help and not just rely on God to sort of do everything miraculously. Okay, so any comments or questions about this material before I move on? I mean, one question that comes up, which I'm not going to really deal with now, is how much danger is too much danger? Because there has to be some kind of acceptable risk, right? There are things we do every day that are dangerous in some way. Driving a car is dangerous. The classic example in Jewish law is, circumcision is something that has a small but real risk. There are things we do all the time that are risky in some ways. Certain things that we eat are risky. Is there a violation of Jewish law, not to go for that run today because that run might be the difference between a heart attack down the road and not. There's all questions of degree, and I want to, I guess, leave that as an open question, possibly for a future class, about sort of prevention and what the criteria are for when something is an imminent danger versus an acceptable risk. One interesting piece of that is that if you look at the Jewish literature on smoking, that actually changed over the course of the 20th century, where at a certain point it was well, God will protect people, and then you never know what's going to happen. Then there was sort of an intermediate phase of, well, we're not going to tell people they shouldn't smoke because it's better for them to sin unwittingly than to try and fail, or to not do the right thing. And sort of later on, Jewish law basically became, if you possibly can, quit, and if you don't smoke, don't start, essentially. And that came as a greater and greater appreciation of the risks of smoking evolved. So I thought that was pretty interesting when I was researching this. So one more, I've actually used this, a famous parable that I've actually mentioned on High Holidays this year in a different context. So there's, sort of whole, like small scale, not doing dangerous things. Then there's acting for the common good. And there's a parable of Shimon Bar Yochai, who talks about men being on a ship, and one person takes a drill and starts drilling a hole through the ship underneath his seat. And the others say to him, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing just sitting there and drilling? It says, what do you care? So this is not my translation. I copied and pasted and should have edited it. He says, what do you care? It's my seat that I'm drilling under. What business is it of yours? And everyone says to him, of course, if you drill under that seat, you're gonna sink the entire ship. That's not just your seat you're drilling under, but it's something that endangers all of us. And certainly in terms of public health issues and infectious disease, that's something that really seems pretty obvious, a pretty obvious parallel. So I want to move on now to vaccines and Jewish history. And before I get to sort of the texts, so I want to talk a little bit about the history of smallpox, because this is where we have a lot of the literature about vaccines, and because that's where we have the history of vaccination in the Western world. So smallpox, of course, is this devastating disease that killed, I think a figure I came up with is in the 18th century, it was a leading cause of death and killed about 400,000 people a year in Europe. It was a plague, it was devastating, people were terribly afraid of it. And one thing that, so we all know, we've all heard about the smallpox vaccine from Jenner, but before that, there was a practice called variolation, which was people would take someone who had smallpox and take some of the fluid, the pus basically from a smallpox blister, and inject that into someone who wasn't sick. And the idea, I think, was that a small controlled dose of it for someone who's young and healthy, they'll get a small case of smallpox, and it's much less likely to be severe, and that could protect them then from getting the full-blown disease later on. And this was something that the royal families in Europe did before anyone else, actually. There was an interview I heard with, what's his name? I want to say it's Stephen Johnson, who wrote, let me actually double check. I have the browser window open. Stephen Johnson. Not finding it right now, but I'm sort of typing blind here. But I think he wrote about it, where if you look at the life expectancies of regular people versus royalty in sort of the Middle Ages and early modern period in Renaissance Europe, that at a certain point, the life expectancy of royalty suddenly shoots up compared with regular people. And one of the things they think may have been happening then is that the royalty were doing this procedure, this variolation on their kids, because it was a small chance of death, and certainly some children died from this, but it was a much smaller chance than if they got full-fledged smallpox. So that was sort of early, proto-vaccination was giving someone a small dose intentionally of the actual disease. And then Jenner, I believe it was in England, discovered that milkmaids were not getting smallpox, or were getting it at a much lower rate. And it turns out there was a related disease, a related virus called cowpox, and that caused very few symptoms in humans. And milkmaids tended to get cowpox as part of their jobs, and it turned out they were then largely protected from smallpox. And so that was Jenner's vaccine, was taking cowpox cowpox material and using that to inoculate people. And it turned out that protected him from smallpox. It was much less dangerous than this earlier variolation. So that being said, this is the background to the Jewish history with smallpox and with vaccination. And I have sort of two sets of sources here. Some of them are sort of summaries, and some of them actually go into the actual text. These are from a response by Rabbi David Golinkin, who is I believe he's the head of the Israeli conservative movement, the Masorti movement's body on Jewish law. And he's written on vaccines in general, and then he wrote on the COVID vaccine in particular. And in that piece on vaccines, he quoted all this earlier material on smallpox. So I copied and pasted some of this because that was fascinating. So one of these is from someone who wrote in London in 1785. I'm sorry, 1785, who was not a rabbi, but he was a learned person. And he had two of his children who had died of smallpox. And he very much supported this variolation of taking smallpox material and transferring it to healthy people. And he quoted that first text we looked at, you shall guard your souls very much. And he saw that he basically saw this vaccine as a fulfillment of that mitzvah. That's a pretty early source. And this is Rabbi Yishmael Cohen of Modena in Italy, who also dealt with this question of this earlier sort of less safe smallpox inoculation. And he actually says there's an acceptable amount of risk, even though there's some danger. He says, even though there's a possibility that 1 in 1,000 people who get this will die. And then in his experience, since we've never heard or seen anyone die from this disease, according to the testimony of doctors who testify according to the wisdom of their art, even we hear of someone who died from this treatment, it's a tiny minority. We don't take this into consideration. So you might think in Jewish law that we don't weigh sort of one life against another. I mean, it's certainly true that every life is equally precious, but when you're talking about making a decision about doing something or not, there's a notion very deep in Jewish law that you go according to the probabilities, especially when there's a very, very small probability of a bad outcome. That something bad could happen, but in this case it was 1 in 1,000, and for him it was kind of a no-brainer that even if 1 in 1,000 people die from this earlier kind of smallpox inoculation, does not stop it from being, something not only that you can do, but probably you should do. Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, the Bratslav Hasidim, this is attributed to him. There's not actually this is an oral tradition. I don't know how accurate this is, but this was a much later thing attesting to something he said that. So our rabbi of blessed memory said that they must set on pakin, which Yiddish is smallpox, and setting up pakin is a translation from Yiddish of stellen pakin, to vaccinate against smallpox. So he said, if you must set pakin for every baby before a quarter of a year, so before they're 3 months old, because if not, they're like someone who sheds blood. It's equivalent to committing murder not to vaccinate a baby for smallpox before the age of 3 months. Even if they live far from the city, they must travel there, even when the cold is great, and so forth. So you live out in the boondocks in the middle of winter, you're still required, according to Rabbi Nachman, to go and get your child vaccinated against smallpox before 3 months, which I found pretty extraordinary. And then there were, these are actually, now some direct quotes, and this is going back a little in time. This is Isaiah ben Avram Horowitz, who's known as the Shla, because it's a abbreviation for his book Shnei Luchot HaBrit, the 2 tablets of the covenant. So Shin Lamed Hey is Shla, and then wonderful Hebrew abbreviations. And he says, I'm surprised when it comes to smallpox outbreaks, which spread from child to child, why people don't take their children out of the city. In the future, the fathers will be responsible for the deaths of their children who are nursing and have committed no sin, and those who are weaned and have committed no sins and died from sicknesses. For the sickness, his father didn't take them away. Every man who fears God should fear every eventuality. These things are included in protecting the body, are included in the warnings of Deuteronomy, the text we looked at the beginning, Take utmost care and watch yourselves scrupulously. And this is also the way of the world to take care of one's body, since it's the container the soul is wrapped up in, so it will be a throne for the soul. I love that image, actually, that the body is both a container and also a throne for the soul. But there's this notion that there's something holy about our bodies, and taking care of them is a mitzvah. And in particular, there's this notion of not intervening on behalf of children just sort of staggered him. Shlomo Ganzfried, who lived in the 19th century, and he wrote a book that some of you might have heard of called the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, which became sort of a household handbook of Jewish law. It's sort of a summary and abbreviation of the Shulchan Aruch. It tends to be stricter than Sephardi practice. It kind of has a lot of Ashkenazi stringencies in it, but a lot of us who had Orthodox parents or grandparents or great grandparents, this was often like the book of Jewish law that was in the house in the early 20th century. It was sort of very popularized. So the question is, there are certain things you're not supposed to do on Shabbat, and here's the situation of so you live in a city and the smallpox doctor comes to town and is only there on Shabbat, and what do you do? And the answer is, when a non-Jewish doctor comes to vaccinate children against smallpox, if the Jew can offer him compensation to wait till after Saturday night, they should do so. If the doctor refuses and it has to be done on Shabbat, then the Jew shouldn't hold the child, but let a non-Jew hold him. So you have a Shabbos goy basically to hold the kid. And then he adds later that if a non-Jew is unavailable, a Jew can. So basically, this is you have to get this done on Shabbat. And here's some workarounds to you should try to get it not done on Shabbat. You should try to sort of do it in a slightly different way by having someone else hold them. But when it comes down to it, that this is like any other commandment to any other opportunity to preserve life, and that absolutely you do it even though it might break Shabbat, if it were not so important. And Israel Lifshitz, who was in Danzig, I'll skip some of this, but just something that was fascinating. He was, what were his years again? 1782 to 1860, and in his he's talking about non-Jews and their place in the world, and sort of praising righteous non-Jews. This is on Pirkei Avot, and he says, "We see some righteous among the non-Jews who know the Creator of the world and believe in God's holy Torah and do good deeds also for Jews. Some have done great things for the world, like the Hasid, the righteous person Edward Jenner, who developed the smallpox vaccine." It's right here. Hasid Jenner, yeah. Shimtzi ha'apakon. Oh, so okay, I cannot read that. I think this transliteration from German or something. I can't read that, but it's who developed the smallpox vaccine. They've saved millions of people from sickness and death and disfigurement. So I think it's fascinating. He's calling Jenner a chassid. He's calling him a righteous person because what he's done for the world, and then this is just sort of development of smallpox in Jewish literature. That this is the Aruch HaShulchan, slightly later, 1829 to 1908. He wrote, we saw in an earlier text that smallpox is infectious and the rules to be far away from the city, but nowadays that's not common because for 150 years, doctors have given every small child a year of age or older cowpox. And because of this, they're saved from, and it says it literally is a cowpoxin in the Yiddish there. So he's saying cow, he's writing out cowpox. And because of this, they're saved from this disease as is known. And then we have Chaim Sofer, Sephardi, from Baghdad to Jerusalem. And then he's again says, we don't have to take children out of the city now because now there's a cure, a vaccine, there's specialists who administer it. It's no longer like the Shlah, who the first legal response that we looked at said you take kids out of the city. We have specialists that makes vaccine and no person's been injured for them. They do it every day. Now the specialists are even more precise because they do the injection with a needle in the hand of the child instead of taking stuff from a smallpox blister and transferring it to someone. That it's much more refined now because of this. Children don't get smallpox. So this is one of the, and this is pretty uniform in Jewish law, that I haven't found anyone who is saying, oh no, this is against nature, or our immune system should be able to handle it, or just trusting God. And part of that's kind of because of the history, because smallpox was so devastating, and it was so and it was such a miracle that it was preventable, that Jewish law has never, never, I won't say never, but has largely respected medicine and respected sort of the expertise of human beings, and seeing good medicine as a mitzvah and something that doctors are doing holy work when they practice, and that we should appreciate it and avail ourselves of it, and not avoid it. And then just a couple of things from modern Orthodox authorities about, and this is, a lot of these were from, there was a measles outbreak in the ultra-Orthodox community back about 2012, I think, where the vaccination rates were low. This is in Israel largely, but also in the United States. And so here are some, these are some modern Orthodox, and also sort of, not necessarily Haredi, but I put some of these people in the ultra-Orthodox camp about vaccines. And Rav Shlomo Aviner, who I think died recently, said, is one obligated to vaccinate? And some of this is what we read before. He's quoting Deuteronomy, he's quoting Maimonides. And then he's asked, we have some freedom to do what we want with vaccinations. And his response to that is, first of all, real freedom is guarding the Torah and mitzvot, so doing the right thing. Second, you don't have freedom as a parent to endanger children because you didn't vaccinate them. And third, you also endanger other people close to you, and this implicates the din rodef, the law of the pursuer. And what this is alluding to in Jewish law, and this is a very strong thing to say, is that when someone is coming after you to kill you, you can kill them instead. It's the legitimate self-defense in case of being in danger of your life. And he's taking that notion and saying, this is that serious. This is like a case of self-defense, that someone who isn't vaccinating themselves is endangering other people's lives. And that's like, the case of justified self-defense, which was a very strong thing to say. Then the question of someone else, this is Rabbi Eliezer Melamed, he's modern Orthodox, I believe, who wrote in a publication called Revivim, said that gets to the question of relying on other people to do the right thing, because one of the things we know from public health is that if you have say for measles or something, you have 95% vaccinated, 92% vaccinated, you're still probably okay, because you need a critical mass of vulnerable people in a population for a germ to spread. And he's saying, well, if people said to him, well, we don't want to vaccinate our kids, but everyone else is doing it, so we'll benefit, and that's fine. And he basically says, this is immoral because everyone does this, the population won't be vaccinated. This is a pretty obvious point. And serious and contagious diseases will turn into plagues, epidemics. The word uses magefa, which is the same word as in that's used for a plague in the Bible. And then his last sort of analogy there is, this position is the same as a person claiming that if he alone avoids military service, the security of the state won't be harmed, because one less soldier won't change the state of national security. And they too benefit from the protection of everyone else in the army. But if everyone prefers their own personal safety and comfort, our situation will be dreadful. So that's, and that's I think a particularly powerful, argument to use in the modern Orthodox community in Israel, obviously, when universal military service and analogizing it to serving in the military, I think is precisely a very effective way of putting it in Israel. And just a couple of quick things from the conservative movement. There is a tshuva from a response from several years back that was overwhelmingly approved. That's basically said it's fine for Jewish day schools, like Schechter schools, conservative day schools, to require immunization for their students, and that there's no space in Jewish law to support religious exemption from state mandated immunizations. And he goes into a lot of detail on that. And Rabbi Elliot Dorff, in his book on medical ethics called Matters of Life and Death, also comes down the same place, that it's a violation of Jewish law to refuse to be inoculated against a disease where it has a proven track record of effectiveness. And then the question is, what's a proven track record? And I wanted to close with that, because one of the things that people have been concerned about is with the COVID vaccines, they were approved very quickly, they're approved in sort of an emergency. Are they really an established treatment? And I guess the take home that I found is that whether the FDA, it's in one category or another, according to the FDA, is not the arbiter of whether it's established treatment. The arbiter is whether it's known to be generally effective. So it doesn't even have to be 100%, but if it's something that, generally speaking, treats the condition or prevents the problem, that's good enough. That's as opposed to ivermectin or colloidal silver, or and the other things you see passed around. That's something that has been studied, and the large majority of medical professionals say this is worthwhile, is considered to be established, and particularly and particularly in the case of an epidemic, that there's a little bit more of a judgment call if it's something that's, if like say there were a vaccine for something very rare or something not contagious, there's more room for okay, I'm gonna wait and see. But when you're preventing harm to other people and when something is spreading out of control, it's much more urgent. And Rabbi Galinkin, this is said if the vaccine is 95% effective and the only side effects so far are headaches and the like, then it is a refuah b'duka, established treatment. Yeah, so I mean, I'm sure you're not altogether surprised that Jewish law and text around vaccinations came down this way. And certainly the uptake rate among most of the Jewish community has been quite high, and the places where it hasn't been are often because of some weird disinformation spreading. My Rabbi Miriam's aunt, a couple months ago, I dropped her an email and said, I just wanted you to see this information, to prevent you from making a terrible mistake, and sent some wacky, fringe medical conspiracy theory thing about the vaccines. We had to tell her, Irene, you way missed the boat. Everyone in our family has been vaccinated and double vaccinated, and some of us have our boosters already. She's like, well, I tried, but yeah, there's definitely some weird stuff circulating. But I have to say that one of the things that I want to close this piece of discussion with this is that one of the things that was going on both in Israel and in non-Orthodox circles was the question when the vaccines came out at the end of 2020, beginning of 2021, is there a bracha? Is there a blessing you say when you receive the vaccine? And and there were a couple of takes on it, but one is Shechianu, and another is Hatov HaMeitiv, for the blessing you say when you receive good news. But there's something there about sort of the miraculous speed at which there are all these building blocks that have been worked on for years were suddenly able to be sort of assembled so quickly in case of emergency that people were asking the question, does this feel like a miracle? And for a lot of people, the answer was yes, or at least you can make an argument that that's our experience of it. So, all right. Any questions? Any comments? Any things you'd like to raise? Anyone?
Yes, I'd like to. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Robert?
Arya, hi.
How you doing, guys?
Good.
I think, as you pointed out, there's misinformation or disinformation, whatever you want to call it. I think people don't understand and they try to make it clear, but people don't. The anti-vaccine people don't listen. The vaccine itself does nothing more than prepare, or alert, or stimulate the immune system. It doesn't kill itself, but the material of the vaccine, the fluid, whatever they inject, does not do anything to the, it does not kill the virus. It's the body immune system that gets alerted. Number one. Number two is the fact that the vaccines also, it turns out, they're finding a lot of things every day, every week, something else comes up, is the fact that taking the vaccine makes it, it prevents you from either going to the hospital or, God forbid, dying. So that's another big plus the vaccine does. You get a less severe effects and so forth. Now, we know that a lot of young people whose immune system is better than older people, obviously. So older people, of course, have all kinds of other issues and so forth. So many of them are asymptomatic, and which means that the body doesn't even tell you that you have a virus. So and they tried initially, as you know, Sweden tried initially to go with herd immunity, and very quickly they found out it's no good. The only country that I'm kind of surprised that Fauci and some other people, and he does a lot of good, but there's also other things that I don't like. I did a quick study, and all you do is go to Google and you look at it, how many people in Israel or other countries or in the United States, how many people got infected, how many died, and so forth. Comparative analysis. And that was, South Korea came in. 3 or 4 countries came in: Israel, United States, and South Korea. Now, South Korea, well, everybody knew about the virus. They say we only found out early January or mid-January when somebody came into the country and they got stopped by a cop and they found out they got the virus. But South Korea apparently was prepared before. South Korea, like, give you an example, just a bit, in terms of morbidity, how many people died or how many people got infected. United States, as we know, 830,000, let's say almost 1 million people died, and we have 330 million people. Korea has got 50 million people, as 1/6 or 1/7 of us, and only 4,000 people died, period. So they knew right away to wear masks, and wearing masks in the right, and now they're finding out that, oh, we should have an N95, KN95, the cloth is not effective. And why didn't we understand it from January 2020? And as you remember, Fauci and other people say, oh, the masks don't work, because they wanted to preserve it for their health people. So they so there's all kind of things going on and so forth. So as I said, I think there's no choice. We do need to take the vaccine, because the people who are wound up in a hospital, 75% of them are people who are never vaccinated. And in Israel, I read a study where 97% of the people who died were non-vaccinated people. So, the choice is, in my opinion, you have no choice but to take it. There are side effects. One of them is kind of very funny. Now suddenly they realize that the sperm, the men's sperm, does not survive. It's no good for about 3 months. And so forth. So if you want,
I heard that what I had seen is that one of the side effects of after COVID is male infertility for a while. So anyway, thank you, Ari. I don't want to get into the weeds about the details, but there's definitely more that people. My brother is actually an infectious disease doctor. Who actually managed to, he and his kids, his family managed to not get it and not get it all this time, and then it looks like the whole family, including him, just tested positive in the last couple of weeks. So Omicron is definitely very contagious. And one thing that getting back to the history of vaccines for one more second, someone mentioned polio earlier on, how miraculous the polio vaccine was when it came out. With the complication rate for most people, polio was diarrhea, low fever, digestive discomfort. The rate of serious complications or death from polio was about 1%. So when you hear people talking about, the rate from COVID isn't that high, it's higher than polio. But 1% is a lot of people, as we unfortunately know. Okay, yes, Sandra.
I really should change that to Sandy. I hate Sandra, but
Okay.
anyway, brother thinks when I have to vote, I have to be sad. That's okay. I just have one comment in terms of these anti-vaxxers and their sense that, well, they're going to get protected from herd immunity. And to me, that is a very, very selfish way to look at this. And, you know, just in terms of a moral kind of thing, it's just, I think it's selfish to depend on herd humidity. Boy, that's my senior brain. I think it's selfish to depend on that and put the responsibility on other people and not yourself.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. There's one other thing that just a piece of medicine, which I found fascinating. I was a biology major, but I never took an immunology class. And I learned one thing I learned in the past, few weeks reading about this stuff is that, when you first get vaccinated, you're making antibodies to this spike protein on the virus. And there's a whole bunch of them, but some of them are kind of trashy. Not all of them are great. Some of them, are very good at sticking to it, and some of it are just so-so. And over the course of time, where you take a couple shots, you wait 6 months or so, and your immune system is basically doing evolution on the kinds of antibodies you make, so that your antibodies get better and better over time. Something called affinity maturation. I had no idea about this. So that they're finding that especially with the booster, one thing that my understanding is that it was not clear how long the gap should be between the first and second shot. And they did sort of a natural experiment inadvertently in England because they didn't have enough vaccine. They had the interval between the first 2 shots be longer. I think it was 6 weeks instead of 3. That turned out to be more effective. And it seems like the immune system needs some time to sort of assimilate and rehearse. But that's one of the reasons why maybe the third shot, the booster, 6 months later, seems to be really doing a lot, is because the immune system needs time to sort of process and instead of having a bunch of bad antibodies, focus on the most effective ones. It actually keeps around some of the spike protein and basically practices on it and does these rounds of evolution so that things get better and better and better. So when you have the booster after 6 months of that happening, that the antibodies you're making, there's not just more, but they're better. So I thought that was fascinating. I've heard people say sometimes, oh, you learn too much about the science. It takes the mystery and the wonder out of it. And from my experience, often it's just the opposite. That seeing the complexity and that is evolved in the biology and in the universe is not disillusioning. It's inspirational. So we're past 2 o'clock. I want to just now we had a chance to talk. If anyone has suggestions for the next couple of weeks about any topic in Jewish medical ethics we might like to speak about. Stu, you sound like Mickey Mouse. We actually can't understand you at all. You sound like you're Mickey Mouse talking in helium balloon. We actually can't understand you at all. You want to type in the chat? Thank you.
I'd like more information on how you make life and death decisions.
Okay, good.
But not next week, because I can't be here next week. So save it for the 3rd week, since that's
Yeah, I may actually, Rabbi Neil has actually offered to come in either during these 3 weeks or at some point and gives a perspective, because he sits on the ethics board of the hospital and deals with this stuff all the time. So maybe I'll see if he can come in 2 weeks from now.
That would be great. Thank you, because I can't be here next week.
Okay. Anyone else?
Just a quick comment again is that as you mentioned, it turns out they found out that if you do take the vaccine and subsequently you get infected, apparently you're 5 or 10 times better than the reverse. That's another thing they found out, I think, cool. Right?
I'm not sure, but I thank you for sharing that. So Sue just added organ or body part donations. Organ donation in Jewish law. It's a great one.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Any other ideas?
I just want to thank you very much for doing this. It was very informative and I really enjoyed it.
You're very welcome. It's my pleasure.
Me too.
Any other ideas? So sorry. So I've got organ or body part donations. I've got life and death decisions. We could do, reproductive health stuff, it's sort of assist like fertility, Jewish fertility, take on Jewish fertility treatments, abortion, stem cells, things like that. We could talk about that. So let's see.
Looks like the Stearns had their hand up and then it came down.
You have something?
We had a thumbs up.
Oh, thumbs up. Okay.
Yeah, because I always thought that it was against Jewish law to donate body parts. You're supposed to be buried,
Right, this,
whole, not.
Right. So that's a really interesting one. Maybe we'll talk about that next week, because that's a really interesting one. And it's one where
Yeah.
there's a divide even in the Orthodox community at this point about certain kinds of organ donation. And some of that actually has to do with definition of death, whether, for instance, brain death is the criteria versus, the heart stopping, and what happens when someone's like on is brain dead on, something that's keeping them breathing, keeping their heart pumping. Often that happens with, people are kept on life support, and
What about
often they're kept. Say again.
What are the Jewish ethics of pulling the plug on somebody who
Right.
is, brain
What
dead
about
or
animal parts?
That was my life and death question.
Yeah.
How do you know?
Right. But
Yeah.
yeah, but that also has implications with organ donation, because there are some organs where they keep someone on life support even if they're brain dead until the moment they're ready to start the transplant.
Right. What about getting a
But yeah,
cow's-
there's some that can stick around, and there's some that really have to. It's really from one body to another, pretty much. With not much time in between. So okay, great, thank you. All right. Well,
I have one comment. I'm wondering whether there's any truth that you know about when people are very close to death and they know that a relative, a child, a parent are coming to see them before they die. Do you think that they will remain alive? I'm asking because my mother was dying several years ago, and we were on Long Island. She was in a hospital up here. And we told the doctor that we would leave immediately and come to see her. We arrived at her hospital room, and 1 minute later, just as soon as she saw us, she felt that she could go.
I've seen that happen. I've also seen something related, which is sometimes someone is at a loved one's bedside and they wind up dying after the person goes home for the night. I've seen some people sometimes say to a parent, like, it's okay, you can go, I'll be all right, and that's
Exactly.
not always. I mean, I'm sure it doesn't always happen. I'm sure it also varies according to medical condition. Sometimes I can even imagine maybe someone doesn't want a loved one to see them like this, and to the degree there's any control over it, I can imagine it cutting both ways depending on the relationship. I can tell you when I worked in geriatric chaplaincy for a year at what was in the Philadelphia Geriatric Center. One thing I learned is that there were 2 times of year when people tended to pass away, either right before or right after, which were Rosh Hashanah and Pesach. That they were kind of 2 milestones in the year, and those were the sort of the markers in the year where a fairly large percentage of resident deaths happened. Like there was, either people just made it to Rosh Hashanah or made it to Pesach or didn't quite. But there was, if you graphed it, there were definitely peaks around those 2 times a year, which I found fascinating. All right, well, thank you, everyone. I see that, Wilma, I see you mentioned cremation, that we may get there, we may not, but because that's not exactly medical, once someone is dead, but we might touch on that. But it's a great one, thank you. And if anyone else has ideas that they think of after we hang up, please feel free to just drop me an email and I can add them to the list. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Stay
Thanks,
warm.
Rabbi.
Stay warm.
Bye-bye.
Bye.